everyone. Welcome to Party Chat Peoples. I am the Void, and I'm here with Mikey and Stacey, and
No,
we're going to talk about video games and things.
this is Mr. Popo. He's
From Dragon Ball Z.
I'm
yes.
here with Goku and Gohan, and we're going to go train in the hyperbolic time chamber.
Exactly.
Oh boy.
All right, enough of that.
There we go.
AKA the PlayStation 5.
Ah!
Yeah, it dilutes it dilutes time because there's no loading anymore.
Oh yeah,
I've
totally.
actually heard people talk about how like they're so used to using loading times to like take
Stuff.
a break and look at their
Yeah.
phone or go to the bathroom, and they don't have that anymore, that they suddenly realize it's 3 a.m. and they need to stop.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's definitely one thing that
Mm.
helps though is you still have to wait for online things, so that's actually good. Although
Mm,
things may load a little bit quicker, there's still delay time, for I guess bandwidths and connections to sync up. So you still have that time, but
okay.
definitely like playing Demon Souls, it's just like you die, they have a little bit of fog, you come back. Actually, there was an interview I think in Game Informer, and the developer actually said we could actually have just made you die and immediately port you back to the bonfire or the archstone moreover, but they said we wanted to give the players the break, so that fog, that little delay time is
Hmm, that's interesting. It
Hmm.
makes sense because they do serve a pacing function a lot of
yeah,
times, and they also have like the tooltips a lot of times in loading screens.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like designers are gonna have to rethink about some stuff.
yeah.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves and going
We
on a tangent.
definitely are. So, if you didn't guess, I will be talking about the PlayStation 5 and Demon Souls. And Stacey is still obsessed with Plagues. So, she's going to be talking about Plague Inc. They've added a new mode called a Cure mode. So, instead of it being depressing and oppressive, we're all dying, in the fake world and the real world because of a plague, added something to make us have some hope. We're also going to get into a little bit about ESPN firing its eSports staff, another unfortunate casualty of the pandemic we're living in. Companies cutting corners where they can, not necessarily where they should, but where they can. And Zavi has been playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, not on the PS5 though. So I don't know if you want
No, I'm stuck at 30 frames per second like a
to.
pleb.
Ew. Funny enough, it's so interesting before I dive in, because we are going to start with the PlayStation 5. It's been interesting to sort of watch a couple of games that, we're still sort of deciding on this performance mode and resolution mode, and how, although, there was definitely a visual difference on the PlayStation 4, but now when you have to make that choice on the PlayStation 5, it's like, it's difficult for me. Like I
Mm,
Mm.
started, I think, and then the default, I think they keep it on is more of a performance mode. So I started Demon Souls on the performance mode, and I know this is heresy to be saying, but I kind of just stayed on it. Like I went to the 60 frames and I'm just like, oh wow, the resolution dropped quite dramatically. It's 1080, 60 frames, and on the performance mode it's 4K 30. So I have just stayed on it. I'm not like a super Souls player. I'm not PvPing. I'm not like, getting all these frames and doing all that stuff. So it's not that necessary for me.
so you
But
stayed at 30 frames
yeah,
or
because it just looks so good.
yeah.
Like especially when you're in the
Yeah.
Nexus domain.
And that game, I mean, outside of when another player drops into your game and like those fractions of seconds can really matter,
Yeah.
um, that game's like a very, like the decisions per second that you make in that game, I don't think you need the 60 frames, you know?
Yeah, I would agree. And also I'm not paying oh, I am not
Eat
playing
your
as
words.
a like a attack character. I'm playing as magic.
Ah,
Mm.
So, I don't need all the froms, as they would say.
Yeah, I get that.
Froms. But yeah, I mean, so Demon Souls, I guess I'll just start off by talking about Demon Souls, and then I'll get into the PlayStation 5 as a whole. Demon Souls is great. Demon Souls is hard. Demon Souls is it's funny coming back because just my history with the Souls genre. I played Demon Souls when I wasn't a particularly skilled gamer. I heard about like, oh, this Demon Souls game is out. It's the hardest game ever made, blah, blah, blah. And, after a couple of months, I jumped on the bandwagon with the recommendation of a friend. We played a lot of co-op together, which was so unwieldy back then. I'm just thinking about like, okay, my soul in the corner. Okay, all right, I'm doing it right now. Okay, you got it? Okay, all right, I'm clicking it. Okay, you're in my game. And then the whole, having a body form and a soul form. So you can only be summoned when you're in your soul form, and you can also only summon someone when they're in their body form. And you only get a body if you use something called an ephemeral stone, which you can get more of them, but they'll drop more as you go further in the game.
I feel like
Or,
I'm learning witchcraft the more you describe this.
yeah, or or when you beat a boss, and for every level there are 4 bosses, three like I don't want to say mini bosses, but 3 main bosses, and then a world boss. And just the format of it, because we've had 3 Dark Souls games, and we've had 1 Demon Souls game. This one is just appropriate to mention. Blue Point Studios remade this, so From Software had nothing to do with it. There aren't there aren't many changes, just mainly quality of life stuff. And there was so the game functions as
What are you talking about, Mikey? That camera is no longer centered behind the player. It's bullshit. I'll never play this.
oh, you can change that.
Whatever.
There's so many options to change it to get that original experience. You can
I
go
know. I'm just pretending to be
Oh,
a toxic fanboy.
Elitist.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, options aren't elitist when you can go back to the way that you need to play. So,
100%.
So, other than having to choose between the frames versus the resolution,
yeah.
is it a nice looking?
Oh, it's gorgeous. Like
Yeah.
staring at I don't know if you guys have seen that state of play where the I think the creative director went through every world, and he just takes this pan of the Nexus. It's striking, especially like looking at older videos of Demon Souls, because I've like looked up some stuff just to give a reminder. And since this game is new, you type in Demon Souls, you're not going to get a lot of the remake videos. You're going to get a lot of the original.
Right.
But then going to the Nexus and just looking at it and going, oh my gosh, this place looks completely different. Like the lighting, just the visual effects. My favorite thing thus far is the spell effects. It literally sounds like something they stole from Harry Potter, like this, like this, like just like go on and just listen to it, like go to Demon Souls remake, like Royal or Magic Player, and just listen to the spell effects. Like the particle effects are like amazing.
And if I remember from like the original Demon Souls, that was a sort of day when they didn't have the production, like From Software didn't have the production values that they have now. And so I can imagine that, on like sound design and things like that, that it makes a big difference on the game feel. Like,
yeah, it definitely is. But I just want to correct you. Remember, this is Blue Point, not From. So
no, yeah, I hear you. I'm just saying, like, the original was back from before, like Sekiro, for example, or even by the time they hit like Bloodborne and earlier, maybe even they had pretty good production values.
But it was a Sony developed game, so I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. But it still had the backing of a console, studio. I mean, a console.
For sure. I just remember the little bit that I played a long time ago, like not having a feeling in the combat of like what you're describing with the spells, like this kind of visceral satisfaction.
Yeah. Oh, the visceralness, if that's a word, is very apparent. Hits feel harder, just in general, and I mean, it definitely has something to do with the haptic feedback on the controller isn't super apparent in Demon Souls, but you definitely feel it. The microphone on the controller though is, I think, necessary. It needs to be mentioned in the sense of like when those hits come through, you hear them through the controller too. When you're walking through swamp, you hear. When you're walking through planks and wooden things, you hear. And you'll hear it through your TV, but you'll also hear like a very reduced sort of version of it coming through your controller as well. It's fantastic. I mean, the production values are definitely there. I've gotten through basically 4 out of the 5 worlds. There was a mysterious 6th world that they chose not to, add on, or they said it would be inappropriate as a studio that is remaking the game to add in their own content. and I get the blessing from. I don't think they asked anyway, but you know, that's the only, I think, disappointment. I think people thought that we were going to get a sixth world, which is the sixth Hearthstone. That even in the original game, it's built into the lore. Like when you look at the list of worlds, the
Yeah.
stone is broken
I
down.
think that would have been welcome. So to me, it's them saying we don't think it's appropriate. It feels a little bit like a cop out to me.
Well, I think it is a cop out in the sense of like that's probably not the real reason, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
it's expensive to do that kind of thing.
exactly. And in particular, we were talking earlier, like I think makes a lot of sense as a PS5 exclusive sort of from Sony's grand plan perspective, particularly this if you're just remastering an old game, you really get to focus on just pushing the hardware to look unbelievable without having to have the overhead of like redesigning things or designing new things.
Yeah, that's true too. I don't want to be that cynical, you know, in the sense of, you know, this like it does feel a little sort of weird to be like, hey, we're gonna remake this game and add in something that wasn't there before, especially for something that was so beloved. I can definitely, you know, still, you know, understand that part as well. But what you said also makes sense. Like, hey, we want to make a game that looks great. It's already done. All we just need you to do is bump up the graphics, add in some quality of life stuff, and call it a day.
And let's not forget the era that we're in. That could be some DLC.
Yeah,
but
that's my fear is that they're going to come around with it later, but now they're going to charge you extra.
I mean, I think it's a perfectly fair thing to go like we remastered a game.
Yeah.
That's still worth its money in some ways. And if we suddenly need to pull in designers and other sorts of talent that we didn't use for the remaster to create a new thing, that's fair game as DLC with a
also
little bit
like
of
consulting
price
with
on it.
software, because you know, I like I said, I don't want to be that cynical and say like, oh yeah, they didn't want to do it, but I think they really want to stay, you know, sort of authentic to the original in the sense of like, hey, we've seen gamerdom happen where something is remade or there's a remaster and they're just like, ill, don't play that, you know, go
Yeah.
back to the original. So that's a
And
definite thing that can happen too.
yeah, and like all indication is that Blue Point is a remastering studio, right? Like
Yeah.
it would be what was that?
And remake this is not a remaster, it's a remake. Just
Whatever that I'm not going to have the ontological argument about stuff. I just want to like, as far as which one is it, but I just mean that in the sense that like they haven't done
something original.
Yeah, which leads me to believe they don't have like the design people personnel for that. They don't necessarily have you know the team to do that kind of stuff.
To the extent that there's writing, they may not have any writers at all. Why would they need them?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And that's fine. They're awesome at what they do.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think that's probably as much as I'm going to say about Demon Souls. You know, I'll definitely be talking about it a little bit more. But before we move on, I definitely wanted to just sort of give a little, you know, shot.
A step by step of the PS5.
Yeah. So
step by step.
Oh
I'm being
gosh.
a troll. Ignore me.
You are. The system is huge. They weren't lying. It's basically about 3 stories high. It's sitting right next to my Switch, and it's towering over it. It's like if it was like a mini earthquake and my PlayStation like just fell over, it would crush it. I don't think.
Wow, that big.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I showed you, Stacey. Remember?
You can put it on sideways though.
Yeah, it's fine. I have the space to put it sideways. It's not a big deal, but I just think it's hilarious just how big it is. It's almost like the OG Xbox.
It's like they took a full-size PC and they put a fancy cover on it.
Yeah. Right? But it's a beautifully designed system. I definitely.
Now hold on. Let's be careful here. A full-size PC would still be double what the PS5 is. Like a tower, like a full-size tower.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's two. A tower is 2 PS5s duct taped together.
That's otherwise known as the Nintendo strategy for iterating on your consoles.
Exactly. But yeah, it's a very sleek design system. I had my PlayStation 4 and I did the transfer, which I don't know is actually working very well because my friend did it as well, and we both had the same error where you start up the system, everything goes smooth, and it says, "Hey, do you want to transfer a plug and Ethernet cord to each system?" And it's very simple. It's like press the PS4 button, it'll go into like whatever mode it would go into, and you start transferring. Asks you, you want to transfer accounts, you want to transfer media, do you want to transfer games? Everything transferred fine except for the games. It sort of downloaded as corrupted data, so, and I got some errors like rebuilding database, so which was really weird. Easy fix. I just went and deleted the other data that it was, and that was it. And I was like, okay, fine, that's done. But I ended up having to download everything else, which is fine. But the accounts transferred over fine. But the menus are very fast and snappy. Not all of the video apps are there. It's missing Crunchyroll and some other things. There's no HBO Max, but the Hulu, the Netflix, the Funimation, they own them. It should be on there. And Peacock, I believe, is on there. So I'm missing a couple of other ones, but it's not that relevant. And as far as like the games, it's fine. The storage is definitely going to become an issue. I've downloaded about maybe 8 games. Assassin's Creed, Demon Souls, Watch Dogs, Sekiro, Monster Hunter, Destiny 2. That's like about it. Maybe 2 other like PS4 games. That's about it. Nothing else could really fit. So that is.
Yeah, I read that there is a lot of internal space taken up by apps you may not necessarily use.
100 and something other data, and when you click it, it goes, this data has been set aside for, I forgot what it says, for things
System
to make
shit.
Yeah.
So
So there are instructions online on how to delete some of that junk because it's apparently a problem.
Oh wow, okay. And also, I mean, they haven't really approved any hard drives yet, so, or the NVMe drives. So a lot of people saying, wait, so it's like, okay, you release a system with like, you know, severely compromised space in comparison to your previous systems or your competitor systems, and you're not giving an option to add in any space. Additionally, I think unless it's been unconfirmed or reconfirmed, only PS4 games will be able to live on that drive. So
No,
what happens when
they can live on both either drive, they just can't get launched. So PS5 games cannot get launched from anything that isn't the internal PS5 drive.
so what does that mean when you actually have to launch something?
So a PS4 game can exist on the other drives
I know
and be
this,
launched from there. It's
but
just that you can take a PS5 game that you want to like keep in your library like longer term, move
yeah,
it to the other drive, and then when it comes time to play it, you only have to do a transfer operation instead of a download, because the download is definitely going to take longer than just moving
yeah.
you know, tens of gigabytes from a hard drive to an SSD. So
I
you
guess my point is, you know, I'm thinking there's only going to be 2 or 3 more years where PS4 games are coming out. So what happens when everything is just a PS5 game? You
Yeah,
know?
so it's definitely an issue, and I will say that it's an issue that like makes me wince at getting a PS5. The more and more I've been thinking about like the comparisons for this next generation, I really don't think I'm going to get the PS5 for anything other than exclusives, for a bunch of reasons, but like this is one of them. It's a shame that Sony is simultaneously like pushing things forward, and it's good that like this can become a new normal of like faster loading times, but then they're not doing the follow through on like how this stuff works compared to someone like Apple who wouldn't do this. Like when Apple faced a similar thing with their laptops a while ago, they came out with what they call fusion drives, which is to say the operating system handles moving shit around between a hard drive and an SSD, and it does it fairly seamlessly. And while you wouldn't be able to get away with doing it as seamlessly on a gaming console, I could still imagine something like what we're talking about, especially since they made such a large freaking console. They could have mixed their solid state drive with something that is, you know, just a stupid amount of storage, and then like made it part of the operating system to very easily just go, okay, well, you haven't played this in a while, so we have to move this over, and that's going to take a minute or two.
Yeah. 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 It's, even the Switch sort of has something like that.
Mm.
I don't remember if it's automatic or not, but it has that archive software thing where it's like, oh, if you haven't used it in a while, you can. I think I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I know Apple does that where it has the what is it, offload unused apps. The
Uh-huh.
Switch might have something like that. That's either
I think that does delete your everything but your save data
hey,
on the
yeah,
Switch.
yeah. But if you don't use it for a while, it's just like, okay, you haven't played this game in 60 days, 2 months. We're not keeping over here. We're just gonna have your save.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so that's a bit of a shame that they like didn't think through that a bit more heavily. Um, and it also makes me think like there's going to be a PS5 Pro one day. Am I just going to
Yeah. I mean, they've already
want
kind
to
of
wait for that?
this mid-generation thing is sort of the new thing going forward. Um,
Yeah.
just as far as the UI though, everything is very snappy. I was able to take a clip of something and upload it and trim it and upload it in between a multiplayer game. Admittedly, the room wasn't full, so it was filling up, but it was fine. I did it within maybe like 2 minutes or so.
Nice.
It's really great. Like snapping into menus is just like an overlay now, so you can still see what's going on instead of like the full obstruction. So like, say for example, you have a game where that doesn't pause, other than if you press pause. You know, some games even when you go to the menu, they'll still continue. So it's good to have that as well. Spotify is on there. Your account is seamless. You can go to a switcher. So I think the Xbox still comes out ahead on this, where games are just held in the RAM.
Yeah.
Definitely with Sony's, there's definitely like you have to load back into things, but things are still quicker. I have not experienced Xbox, so I can't sit and go, oh my God, oh, this is so bad. How come this system can't do it? This is what I'm used to at the moment. So, but I'm not sitting and waiting at loading screens. Most games have that initial load, and then you're not really waiting for a load for the rest of the game. So yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
definitely I've also turned on Ghost of Tsushima. It really benefits from the 60 frames mode. Sekiro I have on here. Oh, that's the other game I had on Ghost of Tsushima. Sekiro also. I haven't actually seen what Valhalla and Watch Dogs Legions look like, but I'm expecting them to look great as well. And other games are supposed to get patches later on the line. So Destiny 2 is going to effectively be like the PC port come December. So we'll see. But it's been cool. I'm really enjoying it. I can't stop playing, but life is going to return, on
Yeah.
Monday. So I
Sure.
enjoyed this like weekend of vegging out. But that's it.
Nice.
Sweet.
Very nice.
Cool. So speaking of getting out into the world,
Uh,
release yours.
yeah. So, well, right. So much of video gaming is about escapism. And I have a weird, perverse tendency to do the opposite, which is let's use video games to explore what's going wrong in the world. Um,
Coping.
coping is good. And Plague Inc. was one of my favorites when coronavirus hits because it did even before then a reasonably accurate job of helping to explain how viruses can both be hard to stop and also quite deadly over time. So in the original game, you play the virus and your goal is to kill everyone, which is pretty dark once you're actually in the middle of a pandemic, which is in fact killing hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions by the time we're done with the disease, right?
Mhm.
So the new version is a cure mode, where instead of playing the virus, you are playing the other side, if you will. Sort of a not generic worldwide entity whose goal is to come up with a vaccine before the virus kills everyone.
Are we the goodies now?
We are attempting to be the goodies. We may or may not succeed at it. Uh, so one cute little adjustment they've made is they give you an authority rating.
Oh.
And if your authority drops to 0, you automatically fail the game, because even if you come up with a vaccine and distribute it perfectly, people will not take it. Yeah. So you need to
So if
do
you let
things like,
if you let those dirty leftists riot too much.
or the crazy non-masker people or whatever, really.
Mhm.
So, and there are some amusing consequences that are a decent mirror of real life and aren't spelled out in the initial game. So of course I played versus a virus because that was the most obvious thing to do. Um, and I made the mistake of not providing PPE right away to my medical facilities. So then when I sent researchers out to go and research the disease, they actually ended up spreading it around, which reduced my authority significantly. So these are the kind of mistakes you make. Um, it does a pretty good job of also explaining how lockdowns and restrictions can actually hurt your authority. It can hurt your economy, which then makes people less likely to social distance. If you don't provide them with some sort of economic backstop, people will return to work and spread the disease more, and hospitals will become overrun. So lockdowns can be a really good short-term strategy, but in the longer term, things like contact tracing, social distancing, and ultimately creating and distributing a vaccine are going to be more effective for
Yeah.
you. It also does a pretty good job of explaining the importance of government messaging and global messaging, and having a centralized authority to distribute information and to head research. So something that arguably our world is doing a so-so job of at the moment, especially in the United States. I mean, we're very aware that different states have had different approaches to containing the virus, and as a result, it's now spreading fairly widely across the country because if it's anywhere and people move around a lot, it's going to end up everywhere eventually. So I would be very amused to see what would happen if you took a bunch of people who just generally don't believe this is a very big deal and give them the cure version of this and let them play around with it. It would be interesting to see if they just felt it was terrible propaganda or if it was in any way persuasive.
I'm just imagining like a total like stick to their guns, hardcore like freedom warrior just playing this game and just going like they went out with their freedom. It's okay. Like that, like there,
Sure,
I won because I didn't capitulate to the globalists.
sure. Yeah. So I don't know what would happen if you took this to a militia that plays Call of Duty every day. I'm really not sure. Uh, but it's not very expensive if you already have the main game, particularly, which can be as little as $10. It's another $4 edition. Just be aware that as with the original game, there are sort of talents you can take at the start of your game to make it easier for you. These are all locked when you start the cure mode. And if you want to have them all unlocked immediately, it's another $8. So they kind of got you there if you're
Hmm,
impatient.
that's
So
weird. Don't like that.
don't love it. Not my favorite
Yeah.
thing,
You
but
shouldn't
it's
lock difficulty like modifiers. Yeah.
sure.
Anyway.
But you can beat it on normal mode without any of that. Mega brutal mode you cannot beat without at least some of that stuff unlocked. It's not going to happen, I don't think. So eh, still overall, I liked it. And it is a venture into a little bit more political territory. Not that that's totally foreign to Plague Inc. But as I was mentioning earlier, there's a very funny moment at the beginning. I got this young girl reminds that climate change is still a thing. And uh, world governments emit non-committal noises was the response. And I just thought that was freaking funny.
Non-committal users.
Yeah.
The world
But
is burning and you're doing nothing.
sure,
Nah.
sure, sure. Yeah, but even if you've never played the original Plague Inc., the tutorial will help get you through it. You can see you start here with 110 authority. Depending on what version you play, you will start with more or a little less authority. If you're playing at Mega Brutal mode, you'll have less to begin with. But yeah, it's fairly similar. You've got 3 screens, and one of them is going to deal with the things like lockdowns and social distancing, quarantines. Another one will have to do with the, providing the facilities and equipment to try and respond to the immediate illness, the sickness of people. If
Quick
you're
question.
very poor at keeping people alive, it really can mess with your reputation, obviously.
Quick
You know,
question. So when you're playing as the virus in this game, you're getting like vaguely abstracted DNA points to mutate, right? So what's the abstraction for this mode?
so in this case, it's medical research points.
Okay.
Right. So you send researchers to countries and they will come up with some information about the disease. Or if you have people who are researching the virus and they come up with a breakthrough, or doctors who are applying a new treatment may come up with a breakthrough. So it starts the same way. As countries are infected, you get points to spend. But by the time all your countries are infected, and there's a certain amount that increases as people get sick, you actually get points for that too. And it's in that way, it's sort of counterbalancing. So you have a minimum number of points that you will get regardless. But if you want to beat it pretty quickly and easily, you need to put as much effort into curing the disease as you do into prevention and getting the news out, stuff like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
So
I'll find a cure for us, Stacey.
yeah, if you already have Plague Inc., I really recommend it. If you are struggling to understand how this damn virus works, I'd also recommend it. If you don't like strategy games particularly, and it just seems like an outlay of cash, don't bother.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's something that playing has always excelled at, is like this visualization of something that is, if you just like watch a PowerPoint presentation on it, you're just either bored or just can't really wrestle with the numbers that are being thrown around. Seeing it over time in Plague Inc.'s simulation does really give you like a better intuitive understanding of how this shit works, especially over time, like you were saying, where it's like, oh, that country's fine. They only have a couple infected. I should ignore that. It's not a big deal. And then it like comes back to bite you in the ass, where it's just like, ah, fuck, that continent is dead now.
Yeah, they all refuse to take any basic precautions, and now they're traveling everywhere. Oh no. Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is really more about esports, which we've discussed some before. But I had hoped that with the coronavirus situation, we'd see a little bit of an increase in major broadcasting of esports. And we did for a short period of time. ESPN started to pick up and even in some cases rebroadcast games. And that was nice. But then November 5th, along with a bunch of other job cuts at ESPN, they removed the entire esports dedicated team.
Wow.
So they're not saying, we won't cover esports anymore. They're like, well, we can send the football guy out to do a article now and then when something notable happens.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they didn't have personnel who were primarily focused on traditional sports, but were also gamers and also aware of the scene and capable of reporting on it. To me, this reads as a combination of last in, first out in some ways, like typical seniority type of structure. But I think it's also probably indicative that those experiments didn't do a lot for them. They didn't move any needles that they cared about.
Yeah.
Um, and part of that might be impatience because this stuff could theoretically take time. But also a big whopping part of it is probably just that the people who watch this stuff, they go to Twitch for it. They don't
Right.
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
Sure.
go to these
I mean,
traditional
so
outlets.
these were some of the challenges. For one thing, regular sports came back, so that was always going to be a thing. Even in a limited manner, it's going to be more of the bread and butter. Another thing, as you said, is that people are used to using new media to watch esports anyway. And the third thing I think is they don't get the same sort of advertising dollars or broadcasting rights because these video games are owned by third-party companies instead of sports, which are just, publicly used and not under any sort of trademark. It reduces the amount of revenue that they were getting from these esports. So at the same time they've done that, they've spent $2.6 billion on baseball streaming rights. So,
Wow.
this is the same company that owns Disney Plus, which has a brand new headquarters that's being built downtown. That's going to be incredibly expensive and opening in the time of coronavirus, which is kind of hilarious. So this is really about what's profitable for them, clearly, not whether they can afford to hire and keep these people. They've just decided it's not their focus. And I think that means the window is closed. Esports may still become a thing, but maybe it will become a thing via new media, not really
Yeah.
through traditional
Yeah,
television.
that was always my argument of them trying to fit a square peg into a circle hole of like these things were sort of birthed in a new culture on the internet, and we're trying to go backwards and try to retrofit them into new media. And like Zavi said, it's just like people are coming into Twitch, like commentators are coming to Twitch, like games have always been there.
And
You know?
I also think that like by what metric would we say that esports have or haven't arrived? Because when you're talking about traditional sports, you're talking about a handful of things that people watch. Hockey, baseball, basketball, football, soccer, right? Like there's not a lot in terms of like what generates the millions of viewers that ESPN is actually interested in. When you talk about esports, there's just a lot more for people to watch. And if you roll it all into like one giant ball, like you might reach some serious numbers that would be attractive to something like an ESPN. But I think the fragmentation of that sort of thing isn't a sad thing. I think in some ways it's a good thing. Like the fact that Rogue Company, Counter-Strike Go, and I think Valorant is the one that's kind of in the same space where they have like snap quick rounds and all this stuff. Like it's good that there's three different twists on that type of thing. It's a bit closer to the way that soccer works in Europe, where there's so many different leagues and they all play a little bit differently for various reasons.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't.
Esports evolves so much more quickly than traditional sports. I mean, we were watching Hermes Cup for the Hades game, where it's basically just people speed running, and they were making much better times than I've been able to make so far. So clearly, there's some skill involved. But this is a game that wasn't really designed for any sort of competitive play, and they've just figured out how to do it.
Yeah, and that's a good last point on it too, because you really ought to think of esports as an extension of just like gaming, which
Yeah.
has long overtaken most other media as far as like dollars generated and
Yeah.
people partaking and so on. So
I think they just have to catch up, like you said, where the viewership, where the attention is, because uh sorry to extend it, just a quick thing. I think 2 weeks ago or last week, Mortal Kombat had a tournament, and I just
Mhm.
happened to be on YouTube and it was there, and I'm just like, oh, okay.
yeah,
I
we
think
could
yeah,
use some consolidation, right? I could
yeah,
see like whether it's Twitch just trying to put out like a flagship channel of some sort,
exactly.
or like G4 is supposedly coming back,
Yeah, it was
and
gonna
that might do some good things.
Yeah.
We could use some consolidation where there's like a place or
yeah,
a few key places where you can always expect high production value gaming content, often of the esports
yeah.
variety.
Is
Right.
it
And I
is
would
it
love to have a single channel which is going to have something on most of the time, like most weekends, there will be some kind of tournament. And
yeah.
there's actually some thought put towards scheduling these not at the same time as each other
For sure.
and having a rotation that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, well, if I'm not mistaken, I feel like the YouTube gaming hub and Twitch do have this sort of like esports or tournament sort of click link and you can find it. But like you said, Stacey and Zava, like it's not really, timed well or time wise. You got to make choices between what you want to watch
Yeah,
live.
as much as I love Rocket League, it's the way they do it is every weekend they have it on for like 6 straight hours each
Yeah.
day, and I'm just like not gonna do that.
Mhm.
So maybe I
Yeah.
watch highlights sometimes in the background, but like I'd love it if, as a matter of trying to consolidate and trying to have like regular programming around some of these things, if you could have just literally taking, like, they can play the games in one day for all I care, because the broadcasters themselves probably don't want to do, excuse me, probably don't want to do 1 hour every night. They probably want to do 6 hours
Yeah.
for 3 days.
Yeah.
But like just air them on a channel like over time,
Yeah.
like over
Mhm.
the next coming week, and that would give them time to edit it so that it's like, here's the highlights, here were the important matches to watch. But like having it be less viewer driven you know, where there's just a scatter shot of channels and you just have to figure it out yourselves, I
Yep.
think needs to be an evolution of how it works
Yeah,
right now.
there's always that tension with sports between wanting to show something live and wanting to have a really professional end product,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they'll cut between baseball games all the time. So like where it's just like, all right, well, this game's a blowout. We're gonna go to our sister channel and go watch that one,
Right.
kind of thing, for example. But
Right.
anyways,
Yep.
uh,
Evolution, you said. So how has Spider-Man evolved? In my opinion?
nice throw. It has evolved very, very well. So
Yes.
I we're talking about Spider-Man Miles Morales, which I played on PS4, and I'll just like the simplest synopsis of this is just I think it's better than 2018 Spider-Man. Um, so a lot of that for me comes down to like more modest length, a more modest chunk of here's the story we want to tell, and here's the number of side missions that make sense for it, and that sort of thing. Because my biggest issues with 2018 Spider-Man was how it just tried to fill time with an epicness that I didn't think was particularly like well done. Like it just felt like it dragged eventually, closer to the end. But even throughout like big chunks of it where it's just um it felt like the pacing of that game was a little all over the place. Particularly the
Mhm.
weakest point in 2018 Spider-Man was like when they have the whole raft level and like the Sinister Six show up and all this stuff where I'm just like, all right, like I get it. You reached a point where you just want it to be like this citywide crisis and stuff. It just didn't really work for me personally. But anyway, that's more critiquing 2018. What's really nice about Miles Morales Spider-Man is that the core journey is just this steady increase of like your investment and the stakes and like the characterization leading to a climax that's very, very good. It's good definitely on the story front, but it's also good in terms of like they didn't blow their load on gameplay. So
Mm.
when you actually reach that last fight, it's a little bit novel compared to what's come before. It's a little bit, it definitely has some spectacle, and it feels pretty welcome versus both with the end of 2018 and with the DLCs, where the fights felt a little bit uninspired by the end. It felt a little bit like here's one more of a dude who you have to hit more times than everyone else.
Mm.
Um, this one just felt like it really dovetailed as a whole work really, really nicely. The other thing that a lot of people have commented on, and I have to agree, is that uh, this feels centered on the character in a way that an improvement as well. Um, Everything from the sound design to the visual design feels like it's a reflection of this iteration of Spider-Man versus a kind of just generic cinematicness that I think 2018 evoked. Like in Peter Parker's Spider-Man, the music that's there just kind of feels like something from the Sam Raimi movies.
Mm.
Uh, the music in Miles Morales feels like something that Miles and his friend Genki would have like made a mix and like put into his ear to help him like relax and focus while he's out there fighting crime. The ways that like um, in they had this in 2018 as well, where the music will kick in like when you actually start doing the web swinging and stuff. It feels a bit more like you press the play button in this one in terms of the music, the way that the bass comes in, and it just creates a certain immersion that is really nice. Um, Going a bit more into the detail of the gameplay, I think that something that's worth noting is the way that they use the Venom powers and introduce that layer of abilities into the combat. And they took away a lot of the myriad of web shooter options that you had before. And I think that that's way better because it's way more manageable. You can actually uh, for me personally with 2018, there was so many web skills that I couldn't conceive in real time of like how to use them all and mix them up. So I just kind of switched between them sometimes and spammed the shit out of them a lot. Like I wasn't thinking particularly tactically or and
Yeah.
whatnot. And here he has 4 abilities, and that's actually pretty you can reckon with that, right? And then with the venom skills, those are just sort of logical and intuitive in some ways, particularly because they also have traversal effects. So when basically L1 is your like use venom skills modifier button for the combat, and if you do L1 and X in combat, he has this ability where an area around him becomes an area of effect attack, and he launches everyone up into the air, which you can then do air combat stuff. And since you've hit them with venom, they take bonus damage. So you can kind of clear out a bunch of people who are ganging up on you. It's a pretty good like fuck off button, basically. And then your straight up venom punch is L1 and square, which makes sense. And then there's also L1 and triangle for a dash, which you have to use for particular enemies. So there's a context awareness layer to the combat, and then that can also be used in traversal to just get like a zip forward. And I think because of that mixture of traversal and combat, I just kind of locked in like what all those things do. They felt more intuitive than here's a bunch of web like technologies that you can randomly use. But in particular, they actually complement each other well. So one of the 4 like tools that you have is like this gravity well that pulls in enemies, which just very obviously works well with the venom punch, because that hits like a bit of an arc in front of you and can when you level up certain skills can like carry over the venom to any enemies that you hit those enemies into. And so like it creates a very obvious combo effect. So that feels a lot more it feels like the depths of the combat are a lot more reachable with this design than it was in 2018, where I just kind of felt like I spent most of my time focusing on the basics of dodging and hitting and avoiding damage, but was overwhelmed with the number of like random web things that you could use. So I think that this game is kind of just an unambiguous improvement on what came before, and that's really nice. I think that Insomniac has a really uh, solid pipeline to have put this out in 2 years, and I think that's worth talking about too. Because one of the things that this game left me with was a genuine impression that like if someone could come out with this in 2 years after obviously doing a lot of the hard work to model New York City into an open world.
Yeah. At this point, they had an engine that they knew worked and a setting. I mean, they still needed a lot of details, but
for sure.
yeah,
I mean, for example, this one takes place in during Christmas, and so they had to winterify New York City. That's not zero work. It's a very heavy amount of work, but
yay!
They needed to create snow, which wasn't a thing before.
They might have had it before, but it wasn't like this level of like. No, they probably didn't.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
I think it took place in like the spring and fall, maybe.
Right. So like they put this work into like taking the existing model of New York, making it look and feel different, and then telling a very particular story with new voice acting and new set pieces and a new Peter Parker. Very quickly, like it's not worth spending a lot of time on, but he does look too young. I think that like I understand they want it to look like the actual voice actor who does really good work, but he looks too young, so that it's kind of awkward when he's trying to like mentor Miles, and it's just like
Miles,
you're my friend, not my.
Yeah, especially after the Spider-Verse movie has a relatively older Peter Parker, it felt very awkward to me.
Yeah,
Just the couple of scenes that he's in person. There are also some training loops where you hear his voice, and those are fine. But then he's also in the spider suit.
Yeah, he's like 6 months ago when I was in the 11th grade, and I learned how to do this.
It's funny because you look 14.
Weird. Yeah,
weird.
but But I will say, like, I actually kind of loved having Peter Parker's presence in the story be very background because then he just kind of focuses on being like his quippy, silly self. And like one of my favorite lines early on in the game is as things are starting to develop, Peter calls you to check in and be like, "Hey, Miles, how's it going? Like, how what's going on? Like, is everything
How's
okay?"
things?
And and Miles goes like, "Oh, I've discovered a conspiracy in my own neighborhood." And Pete is just like, classic.
Of course you did. Why wouldn't you find that?
It very much is the
Yeah,
dynamic of like Spider-Verse with like
sure.
Peter just being like totally above all this shit and
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
like
so tired of
been there
this.
a
Yeah,
hundred
sure.
times. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's really fun.
yeah.
20 conspiracies before you got to your imaginary 11th grade Miles.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Mm.
But
I want to take a second to talk about the Bodega cat game.
You
I
love
know that that's
it.
I know it's silly, but I'm gonna share the screen even. So yeah, for a game that took 2 years to make and had a lot of facets in it, I do feel like overall it's good editing. Just to show you really quickly though, there is this cute little bodega cat, and it's called Spider Cat. So of course you have to hang
no,
out with
and
him. Yeah,
actually the cat is called Spider-Man.
it's
Oh,
Spider-Man the cat. Right.
Yes.
Yep. You're right. You're right. You're right. So not only can you get him in a backpack with a little Spider-Man hat, which is adorable, but when you have him and then you are doing like cool maneuvers,
Yeah, you can skip ahead to like a minute 11
a minute
in the
11.
video.
Okay, so around there. Yeah, you can see he's doing some attacks
Here it
and
is.
yeah, yeah. The cat actually
Kitty!
comes out of the backpack, scratches the villain's face, and
The
goes
first
back in.
time that happened, I legitimately like
like I
shouted out loud because I was like, "What the fuck?" Like the
let
cat
me
just
and then
yeah, it's so
adding
funny.
insult to injury. Wow.
Yeah, so I freaking love that. I think it's hilarious.
And I'll use that as a jumping off point to say one of the best things about this arc that they gave Miles is really about um, not being in his element because he has moved from Brooklyn to Harlem. And there's a real arc here in terms of the people of Harlem getting to know him and getting to embrace him. And early on, when you do that mission to save Spider-Man the cat, like the guy at the bodega, Theo, he's very much just like, "Oh, you're the other Spider-Man. Yeah, I guess you can help." Right? Like
Dang, man.
there's this very
He's
much
getting
like
he's not even able to rescue a cat without feeling a little awkward about it.
yeah, it's really appropriate. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a very smart like way to, especially in an open world, to make it feel like there's this arc because early on, the way that the world talks about Miles Morales' Spider-Man is very much like he's the other one, and
Yeah.
Sure.
then
Yeah.
by the
The
end of it,
first
there's
villain
this
you see, the
sense,
Rhino, when he
oh, that line.
yeah, he defeats the original Spider-Man. He says, "This Spider-Man is broken."
I want I want to exchange. You may do. It's a great line. Uh,
Yeah.
but by the end of it, there is this earned sense of like the neighborhood claiming him in a sense, and very much being like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is our guy. Which they've done a few things to make that feel earned. That I really don't even want to get into because it's really about playing it and feeling
Mhm.
how they've achieved that arc.
Yeah.
The last thing that I'll mention is that the story did a really good job with its true villain, like
Mhm.
true antagonist, even
Yeah.
is better to say. By there are some hiccups in retrospect that feel a little bit uh, like choppy writing, but
Sure.
overall they do a great job of like making Miles wrestle with what it is to be a superhero and have to weigh uh have to really weigh your allegiances and weigh like what you're going to do and what it means to like do right by the city
Mhm.
and it's still a comic book. It's like if I had to get critical, my least favorite things are still just comic booky shit. like just superhero stuff where it's just like, yeah, sure, they have all the technology to build that suit. Yeah, sure, they have all the like it, just
Yeah, but
stuff
what do
that
you want?
stuff that
Yeah, there's no attempts at science fiction here. That's not what this
yeah,
is
yeah,
about.
for sure, for sure. And most of that stuff, to the credit of the game, does like fade away. Like they
Mhm.
kind of get it out of the way, and it's just like, okay, cool, we're on for the ride.
Yeah.
Um, but by the end, they're grappling with the kinds of things that I'm very happy to see them do for like for helping to establish a new Spider-Man. It's not just like some celebratory look at me, I'm the hero, I'm the good guy. There's a
Mhm.
real sense of like, shit, I have a responsibility and I don't know what to do here. So
Right.
that's really
Yeah.
satisfying.
The,
I
the,
we talk a lot about inclusivity in games, and I mean, I feel like this is a game that gets that right, and they also get right the feeling of editing down a story so it has less miscellaneous, kill a bunch of guys, report back missions, and a lot more that has to do with the central plot and building the world that they live in.
yeah, yeah. That's
So
good.
that was really well done.
Yeah, I think many people sort of complain if they had any about Spider-Man in 2018 was that it was definitely it could have used 2 hours less. Think about it was
It
it
could
was
have
Sure.
used like 10 hours
Yeah.
less.
I was a little disappointed to still see the orange convicts fighting on the streets of New York. You know,
Yeah, that
the
stuff cracks
in
me
the
up.
prison suits, and they're like fighting around stores where I'm like, why don't they go rob a store and get something else so that it's less
They're so
obvious they're
proud of their
convicts walking
orange
around?
jumpsuits and collared prison collar necks. They're like, no, this is our identity. We can't get
Why
rid
would you
of that.
do that?
It's super
I
dumb.
just, yeah, and like, wouldn't they like put on their gang colors or something when they go back to the world at least? It just doesn't make sense to me. But
Yeah,
whatever, whatever.
and that's what I mean by like there's still that hand wavy superhero stuff where it's just like there's crime happening in New York all the fucking time. Like I actually wish that there was an option where it's just like not so much crime. Like I just want to swing around and find pleasant things to do. Stop telling me that New York City is like a
this,
crime
It's
infested.
a trash fire on every third
Yeah, it
corner or
really
something.
is. High speed chases everywhere, semi-automatic weapons everywhere.
I
New
told
York
you.
is not that bad, really.
I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast, but when I went to Iceland a couple years ago, at night, we were out most of the day, but at night we kind of tuned into local TV. And I will premise the channel was named Crime TV. However, all of the crime shows took place in New York, and I just sit there. I was like, what do Icelandic people think of us in New York?
It's so
I
funny
mean,
because not
people like
only
raped and murdered and kidnapped, and it's just like you just step out
people
of your door, bang.
yeah, people probably genuinely think that that's how like I grew up here in the 90s when it was supposedly like crime ridden and it's just like no, it wasn't even that bad then. Like you guys are crazy.
Yeah, yeah, but it's just so funny, and
But
I
it's
this
a
is something
video game, and you have to have people to
yeah, this is
fight.
actually
So
something I've been talking about just generally when we talk about New York and media. I'm just like, it's not like that, right?
you,
Like
you
we
don't
look
really see
getting
subway
murdered.
graffiti on the outside of all the cars because they
Yeah,
have car bodies that don't do that now.
there is no way there would be a high-speed chase through Times Square. You do understand that, right?
It's so
It
funny.
Do
wouldn't
you
happen.
have any idea how many cops with how many guns there
And
are?
I'm okay with that being like the inciting incident, like it was in 2018 Spider-Man, where it's like, oh, there's a shootout in Times Square. Like, all right, this is the intro to the game. We're gonna get all spectacular. That's okay. But then it just keeps happening everywhere.
It's fun. Like you said, it's a comic book.
Yeah.
It's a comic book.
Yeah, I just don't like using that as an excuse. But to get back to this one, Miles Morales, no, it does sidestep most of that stuff and really tell a great story that's worth the $50. I would love to see more regular shots at this. I mean, it harkens back to me to Infamous First Light and
Uh,
Uncharted: The Lost
Uncharted,
Legacy,
yeah.
Mm,
where I really want to see teams more regularly tackle these shorter stories, and
mm,
they might not be as financially viable without the more bigger blockbuster ones where you know people eat up the hundreds of hours or whatever. I don't know, but
I
it's my personal
disagree. I
preference.
think
I think it
there.
comes down to the marketing and the framing. I'm sorry, Stacey. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
I was gonna say there are so many older gamers now that just don't have time for that. That it's
Mhm.
actually a relief to hear that there's a good 20-hour game
Yeah,
that you can
Yeah.
spend over the course of a couple of weekends. And
yeah. It
I'd like to think so
marketing
too.
really is. I mean, when I think of First Light, what was the Uncharted name? What was the name of the
Lost Legacy.
Lost Legacy, and then Miles Morales? In some ways, I feel other than First Light, I feel like these two are sounding like they're well. I can't speak about Miles Morales, but they sound like they're better than the bigger brother versions of them.
I think the first light was better than
It's
the second.
marketing. It's like don't say like, oh, it's this like little thing. Just say like, hey, is this
And I
thing?
think they did the right thing with Miles actually.
Yeah, because
yeah,
so many people are excited for this. I'm excited for this. I feel like I'm more excited than I am the first Spider-Man. But we're also speaking in hindsight. That Spider-Man had to come out for us to be like, oh wow, this is a fantastic game. It was Game of the Year for many people. So to say like, hey, we're not, redoing the glass windows. We're just putting
Sure.
in some new flavor to it. Expect the same gameplay, expect better storytelling, and then expect something that's not going to be, 20 something hours, something a little bit
Right.
shorter. Here
But
you go.
you know what this reminds me of, is when GTA 4 had like its episodic content. That had a similar thing where it was like this isn't some 50-hour epic because gamers don't feel like they get their money's worth unless there is a 50-hour epic story. They
Yeah.
had the Ballad of Gay
um,
Tony and
the
like
Lost
I
Boys,
forgot what the other ones were called.
the Lost
The
Boys, or
Lost
something.
Boys,
Yeah.
something like that.
With
But
the
like but especially when you spend all this time like making a big open world to tell a story in, I honestly think that the mistake that they're making is make the initial release of that
yeah.
still be a short fucking story, and
Yeah.
then you can layer on top of it, and every 2 years or every so often go like, hey, here's a new story in this world, here's a new story in this world. Now, can you burn out on that? Absolutely, don't get me wrong. You can definitely turn this into like a bad issue, especially if like someone like Activision tries to do it.
Yeah.
But I
DLC
I
hell.
personally, yeah, I personally think that so long as they can figure out good stories to tell,
Right.
if they literally did the same thing in 2 years, yeah, sure. I don't expect them to revolutionize the gameplay every time,
Yeah.
but I'd be happy to come back for a good story and some
Yeah.
familiar,
Yeah.
solid gameplay.
Well, if you got a villain named the Tinkerer, there's a lot of room for innovation there. You
Yeah.
know, it's not going to be hard to come up with okay, so here's what the Tinkerer is doing now.
And it's comic books. They can
And
pull a
let's
villain out of their
incorporate
ass
some
in
of
two
that into what
seconds.
Spider-Man can do. And now we've changed his gameplay as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a really good point. I mean, I'm imagining to myself right now, imagine if like they said, okay, here's New York, here's the Insidious Six. The main game is Spider-Man against Dr. Octopus. For the
Hmm.
next year, we're gonna have five full stories, or over the next 2 years. New York is gonna be the same, or maybe every finale will have some world changing state to New York.
Sure, yeah.
Keep on going, and this is the episodic.
And
So
you don't even necessarily have to make it a through line. We're still talking about comic books. If they were
yeah,
to
you
turn
don't.
around in 2 years and go, we're actually going to do New York City in the apocalypse universe where everything went to shit, and like, and it's like, okay, it's visually distinct, and there's definitely still stories to pull from
I
the
want to
comic
see
universe for that kind
coronavirus
of
New
shit.
York with restaurants on every corner
That's called the
outdoors.
Division too.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm,
That's a different kind of coronavirus, New York. I mean, like, there's one where your streets are quiet, man, because everybody's inside.
yeah,
But yeah, it's cool to hear that we all share that enthusiasm. I think that this kind of it's not episodic, but this more periodic, um, full arc of a story product, I think should become normal.
cool. Okie dokes. That's a
Remember, Spider-Man always wears a mask.
he does.
So does his cat.
And his cat.
That. All right, guys. So I think that is it for today, and you can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we'll see ya for
See
more
you next
game.
time. Bye.
Later.
Yatta!